Hi, my name is Felix Marco, and my presentation is on the significance of privateers during the American Revolution. In class, we learned about privateers like Francis Drake, who worked underneath the rule of Queen Elizabeth. Traveling through the Strait of Magellan, Drake sailed into the Pacific, attacking Spanish ships and towns, stealing gold, pesos, and wines, among other treasure. In class, I remember hearing about Sir Francis Drake's exploits and how he was able to keep millions to himself even after completely paying off all the national debt under Queen Elizabeth, and thinking, wow, that's really cool. I'd love to learn more. And here we are. In short, privateers were ships privately owned and commissioned by different governments. Their main purpose was to make reprisals, fight for their government in times of war, and make reparations for who licensed them in times of peace. Although a sum of what was made off enemy ships and cargo was given back to the government, the officers and crew could often keep a large part of the money made off of the captured vessels themselves. At first, privateers acted only on commissioned licenses, which authorized a particular ship or group to take action against the king's enemies. This was before the time period I'm speaking of. These earlier licenses were granted to specific ships or groups of individuals to seize the king's enemies at sea in return for splitting the proceeds. This license or commission was later recognized under the law of nations and is generally known as the letter of marque and reprisal. Spanning from around the Middle Ages onward, many European governments would issue letters of marque and reprisal to expand their navies, attack enemy vessels, and to make money. On March 23rd, 1776, the Continental Congress formalized the commissioning process, and uniform rules of conduct were established. Owners of privateers had to post monetary bonds to ensure their proper conduct under the regulations of the commission. A letter of marque and reprisal was needed to legitimize a privateer, and without one, they would be considered a pirate and treated as one. In other words, much more cruelly. Um, Although many argue that the difference between privateers and pirates is very slight, privateers were not pirates. In general, pirates were considered lawless criminals who operated stateless vessels that attacked anyone's ship in peace or in war, and followed their own unique customs and rules, which generally bore only a loose resemblance to the elaborately regulated world of privateering. Although the line could be blurred, as a privateer of one nation could be considered a pirate to another. Privateers primarily operated in wartime against a common enemy. They did not pillage their own nation's vessels and operated under strict rules and regulations outlined by admiralty law. To put it simply, a commissioned privateer enjoyed the protection of laws of war. If captured, the crew was entitled to honorable treatment as prisoners of war, while without the license, they were deemed mere pirates, at war with all the world, and as such were criminals doomed to be hanged. That's where this lovely picture comes from. Some background info on the era. The American Revolution is obviously something I would hope we are all familiar with, so I want to keep this short. Spanning all the way from 1963 onwards, the American colonies were in turmoil. Some of the immediate causes included the Stamp Act, which put the first direct tax on printed goods, such as newspapers, documents, and even playing cards. In the most simple sense, the colonies did not like that, and Britain did not like that the colonies did not like that. More acts followed, such as the Courting Act, Townshend Act, Tea Act, and Intolerable Acts. War finally broke out in 1775, and following the beginning of war, something important needed to be addressed. The United States could not rival Great Britain's massive navy, and so they responded by issuing letters of marque and reprisal to amass a privateering force. I know that was a really quick kind of summary of the American Revolution, but it's not really what I'm focusing on, so bear with me. During the duration of the conflict, around 1,700 letters of marque and reprisal were signed, and 800 ships were commissioned as privateers. The difference was that ships commissioned as privateers had a primary objective of disrupting enemy shipping lines, while a letter of marque allowed armed merchant ships to challenge any enemy vessels that crossed its paths. Vessels of every size served as privateers. At the upper end of the scale was the 600-ton, 26-gun ship Caesar of Boston, but we also had 8-ton boats such as the Defense of Falmouth, Massachusetts. Crews ranged from a few men to more than 200 aboard a large, fully equipped privateer. During this time, many patriots decided to risk their lives and resources for financial gain and to serve their country. One account from a source I read lists the type of people who stopped what they were doing to become privateers, such as lawyers, physicians, farmers, merchants, politicians, and something I found a little funny, even ministers of the gospel. In terms of successes, overall, the privateers saw many throughout the duration of the American Revolution. Although the information varies from source to source, Accounts I looked into stated that the number of destroyed vessels by privateers ranged from a low of around 600, while others, such as Lloyd's of London, a British insurance and reinsurance company established in 1686, estimates that just over 2,000 ships were captured or destroyed. What could lead to such a difference in estimates includes the type of ships counted in these estimates, such as merchant and trading vessels, and so on. But in terms of destruction, it's estimated that privateers were responsible for around $18 million in damage. Privateers raided forts, attacked ports and harbors where British ships often were stocked, and also captured targets such as politicians and officers from these locations. Furthermore, furthermore, excuse me, the profits made by privateers was astounding, with one specific story sticking out to me. A 14-year-old farmer who had been a privateer for less than a month received 20 pounds of cotton, the same amount of allspice, ginger, and logwood, as well as 1 ton of sugar, $700 at the time, and to top it all off, between 30 and 40 gallons of Jamaican rum. Wow. Uh, Now to talk about some more specific battles and successes, we have Captain Harmon. Uh, Harmon was the captain of the General Putnam, a ship that had taken 14 prizes, in other words, captured or destroyed ships, and had a crew of 150 men. Harmon showed unconventional tactics to outsmart a British frigate that outpowered him in terms of cannons and outnumbered him 2 to 1 in terms of men. After becoming trapped in a port near the town of Saco, Maine, by a British warship anchored just outside the port, Harmon lugged one of his cannons up to a viewpoint high above ground and opened fire on the frigate. The vessel fired back, but could not land a hit since Harmon and his troops were hidden in a thick forest. The British frigate was forced to set sail and flee into the open waters before they could destroy the ship or capture Captain Harmon. Harmon showed both the versatility and tactics of privateers who oftentimes had the best of luck when avoiding direct confrontation with enemy vessels. Another example is Captain James Mugford. Um, him, along with Captain Joseph Cunningham, were sailing from Boston when they were spotted leaving the harbor by enemy shipping. Together, the two captains had a crew of around 27 men, and their enemies, using the darkness of night to an advantage, had 13 small enemy vessels with swivels and 200 men total following the ships out of the harbor. And by the way, really quick, a swivel is the smallest variation of a cannon. It's the bottom picture on this slide. It allows for a very wide arc of movement, so it's nice on smaller ships. The 13 ships following the privateers, uh, up until Captain Joseph Cunningham of the Lady Washington spotted them around 10 o'clock at night. Mugford immediately opened fire on the ships, laying some to wreck, but before the few cannons could be reloaded, 3 ships were attempting to board. Captain Mugford's aboard the Franklin. Within 7 to 8 minutes, within minutes, 7 to 8 more ships were along the side of the Franklin, attempting to board. The boarding was repelled using spikes and muskets, and 2 ships were sunk, leaving no survivors. Following this, more and more ships attempted to board, and unfortunately, Captain Mugford was caught in the crossfire. But nonetheless, the attack was repelled, and the privateers aboard the Lady Washington and Franklin pushed back the remaining boats until they fled. Um, Finally, one last thing I want to touch on in this presentation is something I briefly mentioned earlier, but the ships captured, along with the cargo on the ships, was split among the crew and officers of the ship, and the rest went to the government or person who had licensed the privateers. Ships were also sold, and the proceeds were shared between the owners and the crew of the privateer, or in this case, the owners being the United States government. And the general rule was that no less than a fourth and no more than a third of the proceeds went to the crew. Even if this doesn't seem like much, some crews had captured over 15 prizes and others over 20. At some point, it starts to add up, and it becomes clear as to why so many were willing to put their lives and resources on the line for financial gain. The money earned through privateering was a great aid to the newly formed republic, and it helped finance the nation in the following years. Thank you. That's my presentation, and these are all of my sources. Yes.